Jessica was just getting comfortable on her couch, finally settling in after a long day, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw Jay's name flashing. Her husband's unexpected call immediately raised a red flag. They hadn't spoken much lately, and when they did, it was usually brief and tense. Hesitantly, she answered, wondering what could be so urgent. "Jessica, come to Harris Restaurant, the one near the station." Jay's voice was flat, almost impatient. "Everyone's waiting here for you." Jessica's stomach sank as she processed his words. Harris Restaurant? That upscale French place? They rarely went out to such high-end spots. "The whole family's here, Jessica. Don't keep us waiting." He continued without giving her a chance to respond, his tone carrying a strange sense of urgency. Confused, Jessica finally found her voice. "Wait a minute, Jay. Why Harris? What's going on?" she asked. "I reserved the place," he replied with a smugness that grated on her nerves. "I even invited the family members who usually can't attend." The strangest part, however, was his next line. "Don't worry about the bill," Jay said casually. "I'm using your credit card to cover it." And with that, he ended the call. Jessica stared at her phone, her fingers still gripping it tightly. Her heart was pounding, a mix of frustration and disbelief boiling inside her. A $10,000 dinner bill, using her credit card? Jessica's mind raced, replaying Jay's words. This wasn't just a minor expense or a little splurge. This was a massive, extravagant dinner he'd planned without consulting her, let alone asking for her agreement. And the idea of using her credit card like it was his right? How could he? She'd known Jay to be reckless, but this felt beyond that. It felt purposeful, like he was testing her limits. Jessica took a deep breath, setting the phone down. She'd been supporting him for so long, always helping him out when he overspent or forgot to save. But lately, it felt more like he was taking advantage, pushing the boundaries of what was reasonable. This sudden dinner felt like a last straw, an intentional step over the line. Jessica grabbed her coat, her mind made up. She wasn't going to stand by and let him walk all over her. Tonight, she'd confront him, and if she knew Jay well enough, she suspected there was more going on than just a dinner. She headed out, determined to face whatever Jay had planned head-on. As Jessica approached Harris Restaurant, the luxurious lights and polished marble exterior only heightened her suspicions. This place was way out of their normal price range, a spot reserved for special occasions or business moguls, not spontaneous family dinners. She walked through the large glass doors, scanning the grand interior for Jay. He was waiting near the entrance, looking oddly pleased with himself, his smug grin standing out against the elegant decor. It struck her as completely out of place, and for a moment, she wondered if this was some sort of elaborate prank. "There you are," he greeted, his voice carrying an air of self-satisfaction that made her skin crawl. "I told you I'd handle everything. It's all under control," he said, gesturing to the surroundings. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Under control?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "With my credit card?" Jay shrugged, unbothered. "It's only natural for a wife to support her husband, don't you think? It's what you signed up for, Jessica." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, but she swallowed her anger, determined not to give him the satisfaction. Jessica was about to respond when she caught sight of his parents and a few relatives entering the restaurant. Jay's smug smile grew even wider, clearly enjoying the theatrics he'd orchestrated. Jessica took a steadying breath, glancing from Jay to his family, who were still filing in. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she was done with letting him control the narrative. Without hesitation, she took a step closer, lowering her voice but keeping it firm. "Jay, before you get too comfortable with this little show, there's something you should know," she began, her tone calm but icy. Jay's confident grin faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, dismissing her with a wave. "What could be so important, Jessica? Can't you see I'm in the middle of hosting?" Jessica's hand drifted toward her bag, where she'd brought along something she knew would knock him off his pedestal. "Actually, it's very important," she continued, her voice carrying a subtle edge. "I canceled that credit card last month." Jay's face went blank, his expression slipping for just a fraction of a second before he forced a laugh. "Nice try," he scoffed, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I took the card from your purse myself before coming here." Jessica's eyes narrowed further. "That's precisely why I left it there, Jay. I knew you'd take it. You're using a canceled card to pay for this entire dinner." Jay's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he processed her words. His attempt at nonchalance crumbled, and he leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper. "What are you trying to prove, Jessica? Are you deliberately trying to embarrass me in front of my family?" Jessica held his gaze, unflinching. "Embarrass you?" "Jay, this isn't about embarrassment. It's about honesty and respect," she replied, her voice calm but unyielding. Jay clenched his jaw, glancing nervously toward his family, who were chatting among themselves, oblivious to the tension building between them. "Look," he muttered, trying to regain control. "I'll handle it. You don't need to make a scene." Jessica resisted the urge to laugh at the absurdity. "Make a scene? Jay, you're the one who orchestrated this whole gathering with my money and without my consent. You're the one who should be embarrassed." Jay shot her a warning look, but Jessica didn't back down. She was tired of his manipulation, his sense of entitlement, and his complete disregard for her. She took a steadying breath and straightened, her mind made up. She wasn't going to let him brush this off. She'd come prepared, and tonight, she intended to expose the full extent of his betrayal. As the dinner progressed, Jessica watched as Jay attempted to play the charming host, moving from table to table, laughing and chatting as though he hadn't a care in the world. But she noticed the way his eyes would flicker toward her every few moments, a hint of nervousness betraying his facade. Jessica took the opportunity to sit beside Jay's parents, who had noticed the tension but hadn't yet asked her about it. His mother leaned in, concern evident in her gaze. "Jessica, is everything all right? You seem tense?" she asked gently. Jessica hesitated, aware that revealing the truth would have ripple effects throughout the family. But she'd been silent for too long, and tonight, she couldn't ignore the chance to confront Jay's deceit. "I didn't realize Jay had organized such a lavish dinner," she began, choosing her words carefully. "He's always been a bit spontaneous, but this—" She trailed off, glancing toward Jay, who had just noticed her talking to his parents. His face darkened, but he couldn't approach without interrupting his relatives. Jay's mother frowned. "He didn't tell you?" she asked, her voice tinged with surprise. Jessica took a breath, preparing herself to reveal the truth. "Actually, he didn't ask me at all. And the card he used to pay was mine, and it was canceled." Jay's father's expression shifted immediately, his face hardening as he processed her words. "He used your card without permission?" he asked, his voice low but filled with disbelief. Jessica nodded, feeling a small sense of relief as the truth finally started to come out. Jay's mother looked shocked, glancing over at her son with a mixture of disappointment and confusion. "But why would he do that?" she murmured, almost to herself. Jessica took a steadying breath and continued. "This isn't the first time either. Over the past year, Jay's been using my money without my knowledge, claiming it's for business or social obligations. But I recently found out it's not just dinners or networking." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of receipts, each one detailing lavish purchases: designer clothes, expensive jewelry, dinners at exclusive restaurants. She laid them on the table in front of Jay's parents, who stared at the papers in stunned silence. "These aren't for me," Jessica said quietly. "They're for someone else." Jay's mother looked up, her eyes filled with sadness. "Jessica, are you saying—" Jessica nodded. "Yes, Jay has been seeing someone else, and he's been using my resources to do it." At that moment, Jay noticed the receipts on the table and the horrified expressions of his parents. He made his way over, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Jessica, what are you doing?" he demanded, his voice barely restrained. Jessica met his gaze unflinching. "I'm telling them the truth, Jay. They deserve to know what you've been doing." Jay's face twisted with rage, and he reached for the receipts, but his father intercepted him, grabbing his wrist in a firm grip. "Is this true, Jay?" his father asked, his voice trembling with fury. "Have you been using Jessica's money to fund an affair?" Jay stammered, searching for an excuse. "It's not what it looks like, Dad. Jessica's blowing this out of proportion," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His mother shook her head, disappointment etched deeply in her expression. "Jay, I can't believe this. We trusted you, and this is how you repay us." Jay tried to protest, but Jessica wasn't finished. "I have more," she said, pulling out her phone. "I recorded a conversation between Jay and his other woman. I think you both deserve to hear it." The room fell silent as Jessica played the recording. Jay's voice echoed softly from her phone, saying things that made her heart ache. "Jessica means nothing to me. I'm just using her until I can be free," he said in a casual, dismissive tone. His mother gasped, her hand covering her mouth in shock. His father's face turned red with anger, and he looked as though he might explode. Jessica stopped the recording, her own emotions barely contained. She had once loved this man, trusted him, and he had betrayed her in the most hurtful way possible. Jay's parents were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of disappointment, anger, and sadness. Jay tried to explain, but his words sounded hollow. "I didn't mean it," he stammered. "It was just... I was frustrated. Jessica and I things weren't good between us." His father shook his head, his voice cold and unforgiving. "That's no excuse, Jay. You used her. You lied to us, and you've humiliated this family." Jay's mother nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "How could you, Jay?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jay's desperation grew as he realized he was losing control of the situation. "Jessica, please," he begged, reaching out to her. "Let's talk about this privately. We can work things out." But Jessica stood her ground, her voice steady and resolute. "No, Jay. You had plenty of chances to come clean, but you chose to keep lying. You don't get to decide when the truth comes out." She turned to his parents, feeling a newfound sense of strength. "I filed for divorce a month ago," she told them. "The papers are already in process." Jay's mother looked stricken, but she didn't argue. His father, however, seemed almost relieved. "It's better this way," he said quietly. "Jay, I've given you every opportunity, but this is the last straw. You're no longer welcome at the family business." Jay's face drained of color as the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. He looked at his father, desperate, but the man's expression was steely and unyielding. "Dad, please," he pleaded. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Jessica's making it sound worse than it is." But his father shook his head, his voice hard. "Enough, Jay. It's over." Jessica watched as Jay's arrogance dissolved into desperation, his cockiness finally crumbling. The man who had once seemed so invincible, who had believed he could manipulate her and everyone around him, was now reduced to pleading. It was a sight she'd once never imagined, and yet, here he was, begging for a chance he no longer deserved. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over her. Jay had brought this on himself, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. She looked at his parents, both of whom were staring at their son with expressions of utter disappointment. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," Jessica said softly, addressing them, "but I couldn't let him continue hurting me, or all of you." Jay's mother nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You did the right thing, Jessica," she said quietly. "We're sorry we didn't see this sooner." Jay's father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve better than this, Jessica. And Jay, you're no longer a part of this family until you can learn to respect others." With those final words, Jessica turned away from Jay, feeling lighter than she had in years. As she walked toward the door, she could hear Jay calling after her, his voice filled with desperation. "Jessica, please, don't leave me like this. I'll change, I swear." But she didn't turn back. For too long, she had allowed his lies, his manipulation, and his selfishness to control her life. Tonight, she was reclaiming her freedom. She stepped outside into the cool night air, feeling a sense of liberation she hadn't felt in years. Jay's pleas faded behind her, and as she walked down the street, she knew she would never go back. Jay was left alone in the restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of his own deceit and betrayal. His family had turned their backs on him, and the life he had taken for granted was crumbling before his eyes. Jessica didn't look back. She was finally free. As she walked into her new life, she knew that she'd made the right choice. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one without Jay, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead.